Just when you thought ISIS couldn't get any worse, they have put out guidelines for how to rape your sex slaves. Now, they put these out a while back in January of this year, but it was discovered back in May by our forces and then recently released to the press, including Reuters, and Reuters writes about it. First of all, in case if you're wondering if is it propaganda, now in the midst of war, there's often propaganda. In the case of ISIS, they do their own propaganda against themselves. They're proud of it and they flaunt it. And it's not just the U.S. saying this. In fact, the United Nations and human rights groups have accused the Islamic State of systematic abduction and rape of thousands of women and girls as young as 12. Now, I give you that backup just because the story is so unbelievable that you think, like, really, could this possibly be true? But yes, the UN, human rights groups, the U.S., everyone who's looked at it, the media, agrees. So they explain that Islamic State theologians have issued an extremely detailed ruling on when owners of women enslaved by the extremist group can have sex with them in an apparent bid to curb what they called violations in the treatment of captured females. So understand why they put this fatwa out in the first place. It's very specific, fatwa number 64. Because not only were they taking sex slaves and raping them, but they were apparently committing violations within the rape. I don't even want to know what those violations are. So they had to put out this edict saying, hey, rape your sex slaves right. That's what I told you it was unbelievable, right? So let me give you more details to show you how grotesque it is. Reuters explains, and they got to look at the documents, among the religious rulings are bans on a father and a son having sex with the same female slave, and the owner of a mother and a daughter having sex with both. Joint owners of a female captive are similarly enjoined from intercourse because she's viewed as part of a joint ownership. So, I mean, if you own the same sex slave, you got to have rules, right? I mean, who's going to have sex, when, etc. Can a dad and a son have sex with the same female slave? When you got to clarify this, I think you might be in a world of disaster, and that's exactly where ISIS is. Now, on Fatwa 64, there's direct quotes here. They explain, if the owner of a female captive who has a daughter suitable for intercourse has sexual relations with the latter, he is not permitted to have intercourse with her mother, and she's permanently off limits to him. Should he have intercourse with her mother, then he is not permitted to have intercourse with her daughter, and she is to be off limits to him. Basically, they're saying, like, are we not reasonable here? I mean, come on, if you've got two sex slaves, you've got to either rape the daughter or the mother. You can't rape both. Reuters further explains that far from trying to conceal the practice, the Islamic State has boasted about it and established a department of, quote, war spoils to manage slavery. Now, what's not talked about often in history is that historically, unfortunately, rape was an enormous part of war for most of human history. So part of the spoils of war was, okay, now we're going to go conquer that city, and then all of you who helped conquer it get to rape all the women in, and then we kill untold numbers of people, we massacre them, we move on with our lives. But the rest of humanity has largely moved on from that, and we don't do that anymore. The rest of us call that enormous progress, whereas ISIS thinks, hey, let's go back to those times. And apparently that still appeals to some people. The reason they boast about it is because this is part of how they get their recruits. Don't worry, if you come here, we'll let you rape people. I can't believe this is still happening in 2015. So now, in an April report, Human Rights Watch interviewed 20 female escapees who recounted how Islamic State fighters separated young women and girls from men and boys and older women. They are moved in an organized and methodical fashion to various places in Iraq and Syria. They were then sold or given as gifts and repeatedly raped or subjected to sexual violence. The fatwa also instructs owners of female slaves to, quote, show compassion towards her, be kind to her, not humiliate her, and not assign her work she's unable to perform. Oh, are they not merciful? After you've raped her, be relatively kind to her and don't give her tasks she can't perform. Outside of the rape, of course. Okay, and finally, in their infinite mercy, they also say, an owner should also not sell her to an individual whom he knows will mistreat her. So the rape and the sexual slavery is not the mistreatment, But if on top of that you stub her toe, well, that's a bad guy, and hey, don't give your sex slave to him to have as a sex slave if he's going to mistreat her like that. Again, it's amazing that they think that makes sense. They're like, oh yeah, hey man, I'm so glad you put out that fatwa number 64 because we didn't know whether we were treating or mistreating the sex slaves that we had. Okay, now it's clear. No, not the mom and the daughter. Okay, I got it. I didn't know, my bad. Now, a lot of people will then take this and say, well, that is Sharia law and that's the Quran. Well, a lot of Islamic religious scholars jump out and say that is not the case. Professor Abdul Fattah Alawari says he's the Dean of Islamic Theology at Al-Azhar University. That's a 1,000-year-old Egyptian Center for Islamic Learning, said that the Islamic State has nothing to do with Islam and was deliberately misreading centuries-old verses and saying that were originally designed to end rather than encourage slavery. Now, I got a verse from the Quran you're going to get to judge for yourself in a second, but at least there's a respected Islamic center saying, don't do this, this is the opposite of the Quran. In fact, in September of 2014, obviously this is before this fatwa came out, more than 120 Islamic scholars from around the world issued an open letter to Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, refuting the group's religious arguments to justify many of its actions. The scholars noted that, quote, the reintroduction of slavery is forbidden in Islam. Now, look, they have a case to make. As always, the religious texts are a mess. In one part, they say, go ahead and do it. Other part, they say, definitely don't do it. So I'm going to quote a part of the Quran here, 3350. It says, O Prophet, we have made lawful to thee thy wives to whom thou hast paid their dowers, and those slaves whom thy right hand possesses out of the prisoners of war whom Allah has assigned to thee. So now there's a section of the Quran that could be interpreted in favor of slavery. Now there are other parts that might be interpreted otherwise, and obviously there's a disagreement here. The overwhelming majority of Muslim scholars say, no, it's supposed to end slavery. But look, the fact that they interpret it in a positive way, great, I'll take it. The fact that ISIS interpreted it in a disastrous way is unfortunate. That's why I'm not religious. That's why I'm against the religions, because I don't like that it gives you an opportunity to head in a terrible direction. And before Christians and other religions get a little smug on this, let me quote the Bible for you. Titus 2:9-10. Slaves are to be submissive to their own masters in everything. They are to be well-pleasing, not argumentative, not pilfering, but showing all good faith, so that in everything they may adorn the doctrine of God our Savior. Now, it's not like these quotes in the Bible were never used. They were used against the slaves we held here in the United States. Christians use this over and over to subjugate slaves, and yes, to rape slaves, and to justify it using their religious texts. Now, the good news is we got past that. It took a bloody civil war to do it, and it was some 150 years ago. So, yes, it is in all texts. Yes, it even talks about sex slaves. In fact, here, let me give you Leviticus 19:20, Old Testament. Could apply to Judaism as well as Christianity. If a man lies sexually with a woman who is a slave, assigned to another man, and not yet ransomed or given her freedom, a distinction shall be made. They shall not be put to death, because she was not free. I mean, if you got a sex slave, of course you're not going to put someone to death for raping her. She was a slave. So it is in all of our texts. Yes, there are other wonderful parts of the text, both in the Bible and the Quran. And yes, the majority of Christians and the majority of Muslims take the better parts. But some do not. That is why the texts are often dangerous, besides which they're wrong. So if we can get past them, that would be wonderful. But overall here we have a group still on this planet who are taking them very literally. Yes, there are literalists in Christianity who believe that Armageddon would be wonderful, where God creates a genocide that kills almost 7 billion people. They look forward to that because they think they're going to be spared and get sucked up into Jesus' vacuum. Yes, there are fundamentalist Jews and Hindus and Buddhists. We've talked about all of those on the show. But this group has captured land. They've got a significant portion of Syria and Iraq, and they're doing sex slaves right now. So this is among the reasons, obviously, we fight against them. Now, how you fight against them is a different topic altogether. Even as vicious and horrible as they are, we've got to be smart in fighting against them. You can't let your emotions run away and go, oh, just bomb them, bomb everybody down there. because the slaves that they took and are raping are also down there. So let's be smart in how we fight back against them.